Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Julie's Bicycle and Infuturum on international touring and environmental responsibility. The subject of this webinar today is touring with intent, sustainable, just and creative practices that meet the moment. So I hope you find yourselves in the place you expected to be. Today we're here to share learning from our experiences of our programs supporting environmental responsible touring in England, Denmark and Norway. We're here to share where we are today in touring across the globe, the models that have developed, and we're here to progress and go further today to test new ideas in responsible touring that moves us into regenerative and justice-centered models. My name is Vicky Sword-Daniels. I work at Julie's Bicycle. I'm the Arts Council England Environmental Programme Lead. I'm a white woman in my early 40s, wearing a white shirt with dark blonde hair that I'm wearing down today. I would like to start this with an acknowledgement that this webinar has been put together by my colleague Hannah Graham, who, due to some very unforeseen circumstances, is unable to be with us today. All of the content, the speakers, has been put together by her and in collaboration with Frederick Larson, who's also here today from Infuturum, our partner. I would start with some housekeeping notes. So Grace, do you want to pop onto the next slide for me? Some housekeeping. You'll find at the bottom of your screen a CC button. You can use that to get closed captions. So people are joining from all over the world today. It can be useful to have the captions turned on at the bottom. If you have any challenges with tech or finding that button, please message Grace Redmond, who is my colleague from Julie's Bicycle here today, supporting us with tech. You may have noticed this webinar is being recorded, and please use the Q&A function today. Any questions that you want to ask, pop them in the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end. Any that we don't get to, we will curate some responses for you and share them out to everyone on this webinar. So to begin, this webinar brings together 4 years of learning for our International Touring and Environmental Responsibility Programme and asks the question, what did we learn? What did we change? And how do we build international touring that is sustainable and just by design rather than by accident? Our agenda today is on the screen for you. We will open with my colleague Tagrid, who will give a snapshot of our programme, the ITER programme, what it is, and some insights and learnings from action over the last 4 years. We will then have a speaker who has joined one of our programmes, Ajay Chabra from Nutcut, who will share insights from their project in Fiji. We will then have Frederick Larson from Infuturum, who will share some of his research on international collaborations. And then we'll have a break. And after the break, we will welcome 2 more speakers who have delivered environmental responsibility touring in practice. Jonas Kohl from Foreign Bauhaus and Guli Seksk from Riartica. We'll also have some short Q&A at the end that Frederick will run for us. So we really wanted today to be about sharing what's been done, inspiring you to do more, and really connecting touring with the global picture as it's ever changing and unfolding. Can you move to the next slide for me, Grace? Thank you. So just quickly, a little bit about Julie's Bicycle. We're a charity that unites culture, creativity and climate action to drive change. We've been doing this for nearly 2 decades. We've been at the forefront of the creative climate movement, one of the first to position culture as a powerful force for radical change. Our mission remains to mobilise the creative sector, equipping thousands of artists, cultural organisations and creative leaders with the tools, knowledge and confidence needed to transform their practice into climate action. We'll focus on tackling the root causes of the climate, nature and justice crisis, shaping thinking, informing policy and scaling practical solutions. Now, next slide, please, Grace. Now, Hannah wanted us to start today's webinar with an acknowledgement of the moment that we are currently in. The webinar today is about touring with intention and meeting the moment. But we can't talk about touring in 2026 without acknowledging the moment we are living in. We are in the midst of a justice, nature, and human rights crisis. Globally, we are witnessing the effects and being affected by wars, militarism, genocide, ecocide, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and the continued deepening rise of the far right. World leaders around us are failing to end this or to act quickly enough to interrupt the ongoing harm to humans, the more than human, and the environment. Even within the arts, there are subtle but felt ways that creative voices are being encouraged not to speak too loudly, too boldly, or too political and intentional systemic ways these harms are perpetuated. These are deeply challenging times, and we acknowledge that some of us are more deeply connected and affected in this space than others. Many of these issues are interconnected. So, for example, racial and climate justice are deeply intertwined. And yet power is built when networks of artists and activists begin making and revealing these connections through their work, when liberation becomes the why behind environmental responsibility. So how might we respond? In times like these, it's important to lean into our values and our principles, to connect and act in community so that we can reflect what matters, even when the world around us seems so volatile. We need to build for the future that we want, beyond the moment that we are in. So whilst we go through the webinar and we reflect on some examples of how we've seen just, creative and sustainable ways of touring develop, let's use this to reflect on what more might be possible if we centre care, regenerative practice and liberation. It's the intention we put behind the work we make, the authentic and meaningful ways we engage with communities as we tour, and how we seek solutions to the challenges that exist and feel so hard to shift within international touring that is so important and vital in order to meet the moment. So with that thought, I would like to invite Tagrit to share a few questions and to start sharing some of what we have learned from the ITER programme.
Thank you so much. We'd love to invite you to reflect on these questions. Maybe if you'd like to take a quick screenshot of them or note them down as we're speaking, really thinking through what intentions do we set at the beginning of planning a tour? How do we act on those intentions to ensure that care is centered within our practice? And what principles drive our decision making at every point? We'll talk through the evolution that we've witnessed from the beginning of the first ITER 1 program to ITER 4. We looked at how we started really with centering carbon counting to then looking at innovation, leadership, and advocacy as well. As we consider international touring, we really do it through the lens of learning and hearing from speakers who have been involved in our international touring and environmental responsibility program, which Julie's Bicycle has had the pleasure of running since 2022. And across the 4 years, the 4 editions, it's been funded by the Arts Council England, the Danish Arts Foundation, and then from year 3 onwards, Arts Council Norway. Last year, we were thrilled to partner with Danish sustainability organization Infuturum, who co-deliver sessions and bring their expertise in circular economy and systems thinking to the program. And so we created 2 pathways. One, in response to those who are newer to sustainable touring, and another looking to deepen or advance their practice for those who are looking to deepen or advance their practice and methodologies. And this led to participant numbers tripling. So what have we really seen evolve over the 4 years? As I mentioned, in the beginning, we were really focused on carbon measurement. So the first ever orchestra carbon footprint started then in the sense of really setting a ceiling for orchestral touring emissions over 3 years. We saw also a green producer tool evolving and being adopted by many. And this was developed by the Green Producers Club, which enables producers of films, TV shows, festivals, and events to track their carbon footprint in line with the Paris Agreement. We saw a lot of flight-free travel commitments. Really, multiple organizations started piloting train first policies, particularly uh, and definitely across Europe. We started to see that tools started being shared across networks and organizations and freelancers really implementing them from the beginning of their touring planning. We saw that education initiatives started to develop through deep touring, which meant that tour schedules included not just a one-off performance or show, or concert, but also workshops, community residencies, ways to connect and exchange with locals, artist talk, and so on, ensuring that each tour had multiple events and engagements. And we also saw advocacy starting to really develop and being reported on from 2022 onwards. We saw that participants, for example, at the Dance Consortium UK began a sustainability conference, and they really thought about how unions could join and how colleagues could really take this as part of their own sectoral leadership. And really, there was a real spirit of sharing this knowledge across and between art forms as well. And then we also saw, and what we've really come to witnessing in later editions, is how multiple participants moved from learning about touring to start teaching and leading sessions themselves and presenting and talking at different international consortiums and festivals, writing reports, leading research, and then sharing it back with funders and policymakers. One of the examples we want to shed light on, there are so many, and you'll be hearing from three artists today, very inspiring artists. One of the examples we also want to draw on is one of deep touring, which means that you're really inviting your company and artists that you're working with to share their work very meaningfully and across multiple occasions, as I mentioned, and really thinking about how and really centering people and local communities as part of that journey. And so, where we've seen really inspiring examples is when, for example, Pavilion Dance Southwest collaborated with Our House Festival, Ashkona's Halt, and Bora Bora to test this deep touring principle when it was still really like not very popular or heard of, and people really wondered what that meant. And they started prioritizing slow travel, work, what it meant to work on trains, to work on the road, and what it meant to do this, really respecting local collaborations as well. So, whilst they were clearly reducing their travel emissions, they also looked at adapting in ways that meant that they casted locally to reduce the size of their touring teams. They looked at digital sonography instead of physical sets and all the emissions that come with that. They also looked at rebuilding sets locally using found materials rather than new materials. And it really, the work itself really benefited from it. So that's a real question that we want to center here is like, how is the work, how does the work really come through this process? And it really, we found that it really shows that embedding sustainability early can actually really enhance the artistic outcomes and exchange rather than limit. So they're almost like they're creative limitations that help the outcome. We've seen different models as well as deep touring. We've seen slow touring, which we mentioned means, you know, you you travel less and you stay longer in a location. It also means that you're actually taking much longer to get to the destination. So it's we say this acknowledging that, you know, slow and low carbon travel isn't always easy or possible. These physical routes of these tours aren't always sustainable for everyone. But it means that it starts a conversation with receiving festivals and venues to build up their resources to support artists to be able to do this, their well-being, those with access needs, those who have care responsibilities as well. So making that part of the conversation and having a green touring coordinator, we found, or you know, a dedicated producer that helps artists through planning their slow travel means that it's not a solo project, and it really helps when you meet a roadblock to be able to soundboard with someone and for them to have had that expertise and the background and being able to advise. We've also seen how concept touring, so where the artwork travels, not the artist, has opened up new avenues for international collaboration, really deep international collaboration, where co-curation rather than kind of receiving or sending work or shows takes the forefront. It means that artists have looked at using digital tools in innovative ways, and that local audiences and performers are very involved because they understand that that when a concept tours, the culture inevitably affects the outcome of that performance or of the artwork. We've also seen that venues and venues and festivals have become participants in this. So we've seen that they've started to really understand how they can design effectively and sustainably across year-long schedules. And we've also, in later editions of ITER, started seeing how independent artists were actually citing these different ways of touring as financially viable paths. And our speakers today will share examples of when they've explored one or more of these models, and the really fruitful outcomes of them. In their own words, we've selected a couple of quotes from participants in previous editions of the program, really looking at how they see themselves as part of a changing system that works collectively. So really we see here that the work requires a whole ecosystem. The onus shouldn't be on the artist alone or the company alone. And so through the program, it's really been highlighted that funders, venues, bookers, and festivals have to work together and be willing to explore new ways of doing this. And our program has also shown that collaborating creatives who take part are really learning from one another. We really center peer exchange throughout. And across the UK, Denmark, and Norway, the three key countries that have taken part, different support systems and art sectors offer valuable learning and really gently challenging how each operates. And so learning transnationally has been so beneficial. And we found that artists have really centered the question very similarly to kind of how we took a moment during COVID to pause and and said, you know, what if we just stopped accepting fast travel, fast production as normal? What if artists and venues and bookers were thinking as one connected ecosystem from the very start and building tours that make geographical sense, that don't create emissions just out of habit or convenience? And what does the system need for us to do that and ensure that artists are able to make a living out of this. And one of the biggest shifts that can happen is that we think about how there can be much more cross collaboration between all uh, all of these participants, so venues and presenters and funders working together, choosing to work together and sharing tours through accessible systems and sharing that information very clearly. So rather than looking at competing for exclusivity, for example, and that opens up a whole new way of thinking about how a tour is even made.
Wonderful.
From ITA 4 onwards, these are the main questions that we're carrying forward. How do we further support artists in remote and rural contexts where slow travel isn't actually viable? There are certain, of course, geographical locations where it's increasingly hard. How do we make sure that they're still included in this way, in the way that we want to change the entire cultural sector? How do we encourage funders and agents and venues to continue to deeply consider this work as one of their key pillars in their sustainable journeys? And how do we extend networks to global majority countries where the picture is very different, where, for example, train lines may not exist at all, and so flying is the only way? How do we move to regenerative touring where there's a real deep thinking and consideration for the impact that we leave on a community and how that community can impact us back, and that there's an equitable exchange? And how do we measure artistic and human sustainability alongside environmental impact as well?
Brilliant questions. Thank you, Tagreed. Um, I would like to invite our next speaker, Ajay Chabra, who is a British actor and co-founder of Nutcut, which means mischief in Sanskrit, and I apologize if I've mispronounced that, Ajay. An award-winning arts organization. Over 21 years, Nutcut has pioneered large-scale outdoor arts experiences with sustainability and community at their core. Nutcut were part of the programme on ITER 4, and with a focus on deep touring, Ajay will share his journey to Fiji and how Nutcut is bringing internal learning back into performances to help audiences engage with the climate issues as tangible realities. So please take it away, Ajay.
Thank you so much, Vicky. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tagrid, for that really excellent sort of overview of the programme. Thank you also to the wider Julie's Bicycle team for inviting us to be part of the programme, because I think it has been a platform and a stepping stone for us to apply some deeper thinking on some of the recent work that we're doing, but it's also allowed us to bring together our processes over the last 21 or so years. Sorry, somebody's asking me to speak up. Is that better?
That is better. Thank you, Ajay.
Oh, great. Sorry, my microphone was a bit distant. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you 6 thoughts and 1 provocation. My name's Ajay Chabra. I'm the co-founder of Nutcut, as Vicky has said, with Simi Gupta, former current co-founder and artistic director. We work in public spaces and are designed to reach communities that the mainstream arts often doesn't. It's really important to also recognise a colleague of mine, Emma Dios, who I think is listening in on this call, who really keeps us on track. And I think it's really important to recognise that the work that we're doing in this space is, we don't have all of the answers, and working together as teams has always been the best way for us. Touring, I feel, and we felt for some years now, that the current touring model is broken and completely unsustainable. I'll just put that out there at the beginning of this talk. I think also in touring, from our experience, touring can often leapfrog the diaspora communities that exist around us, and we end up reinventing the wheel, or spending money where that money could have been directed elsewhere. I wanted to sort of talk about Fiji, my recent trip that happened just before Christmas. In the chat, I've just put a link to a blog, which please feel free to read that. In fact, this talk is almost like a follow-up to that blog, that initial blog. Fiji for us wasn't to go and perform to or at or either to export, but it was there. It was the process was to make that journey to learn, and this distinction is really important. The first sort of area that I wanted to talk about was the perception gap and the impacts of climate change on a small island nation like Fiji. It doesn't tend to reach UK audiences or European audiences through the mainstream news. We often receive the information through diaspora networks, through families, and through community connections, through that sort of authentic, what I would describe as an authentic pipeline, and through people who already know because of somebody that they're attached to through their family or they are connected to. And that's a really important strategic perception to recognize as we make these decisions, because we have to think about who we're designing these touring opportunities for. Recently in Fiji, there is a talk of a recycling, a waste to energy recycling plant that's being proposed by an Australian company. And this has really created more understanding and activism, I guess. So there is a kind of lack of awareness of some of the conversations that we have here in the UK, and it's sort of, and so therefore communities are slowly beginning to understand that big foreign investment isn't the way of change, necessarily speaking. The second thing I wanted to talk about was our touring with intent. We went to Fiji, and one of the many things that we did was to sign an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the Fiji Museum. And that was really an intention to go long term with a relationship, and rather than it being a sort of one-off. And already that conversation has developed into thinking about conversations of working with a talent pipeline, sharing some of our learning from the way in which the Fiji Museum works. So I think these kind of formal relationships are really important, and these reciprocal relationships, so that the knowledge flows in both directions and that we're both accountable to each other. The next thing I really wanted to talk about that was about where the knowledge sits, and Fiji has huge wisdom, huge ecological wisdom, the knowledge of repair, recycling, living within limits, which isn't held in Western institutions. And what I'd observed is that Western institutions, particularly UK institutions, would go and share knowledge, but not and nod, and not necessarily bring that knowledge back. But that knowledge really lives in the collective ecological wisdom and memory of islands and island communities. So we're looking at seeing how we could flip that, how we as NUTCART and with the MOU could flip that through working with a very small institution in Fiji, such as online training, youth exchange programs, and talent pipelines, as I've just described. There's something which is very familiar in the Pacific, and that's Fiji time, which is just a natural slowdown time. And that's really worth observing. It's mentioned a little bit earlier by Tagrid's presentation of the program. This idea of slowing down. Now, slowing down can also come with challenges. We know that, and it can come with privilege. Um, spending a longer period of time far away, can involve challenges with family, with young people, if you have those families, and cost, of course. The fifth thing before I wanted to share my final provocation was habit changing. Uh, and I guess over the last 21 years, Nutcut's ethos is to build on habit change, to make small shifts and repeat those small shifts gently and carefully over time. And Fiji allowed that for us to examine that. Um, so it is this conversation, I guess, about those communities that we are engaged with live in real time. And there is a deep connection with diaspora communities here. And I'd really encourage us to think about how we can build and make those connections. My final thought and provocation is this. We talk a lot about sustainability. And I want to move and shift it from being just case studies, but make it into these genuine partnerships where we really listen deeply and take our time listening. An MOU, signing a relationship, is one way, but we have to honestly ask ourselves whose knowledge counts and who is in the room with you when it counts. Thank you very much for your time.
Fabulous. So interesting. Thank you, Ajay. And if anyone has any questions or things that come up from Ajay's talk, please do put them in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the end. I posted the link to the blog in the chat that Ajay was mentioning. I'd like to move on to introduce Frederick Larson, who's our partner for Infanturum, to introduce himself and to share some of his insights on global collaboration. Thank you, Frederick.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you everybody for participating, and thank you Tagrid and Ajay for sharing. I want to introduce myself shortly, and then, as Vicky said, I will talk about the context of global collaborations at the moment. Some of the research that I've been involved in, some of the insights from the ITER conversations in the program, and some from research in other areas that are in many ways connected to what the program is trying to do, and what all of the participants and the incredible collaborations that we've seen are trying to address. So my name is Frederick. I am the co-founder of Infuturum. We're a small change agency and consultancy in Copenhagen working on environmental sustainability and climate justice. We work across diversity initiatives. We especially work on the connection between justice and environment, and how we create thriving futures for ourselves as human beings, and for the more than human, as well as addressing the differences in our perspectives on what that means. We do this across a lot of different initiatives, a lot of different sectors, but the cultural sector and the arts is central to it, partly because we believe that artistic expressions and the way that art creates spaces to explore important themes is crucial in creating thriving futures. And therefore, it's also been a huge joy to participate in delivering this version of the latest edition of the ITER program, together with Jules Bicycle and with all of the participants. I am talking to you from Copenhagen. I am a white, cisgendered queer man in my 40s. I have brown hair and a beard. I will see if I can share my own slides, and I think it means that I will stop the sharing that is happening at the moment, and then I will see if I can. Yes, I think I can. I will open them as a slideshow, and then I hope that they are large enough for you to see. I hope you're seeing a slide
We are
that
now.
says temporal, and you are? Great.
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Because I want to address some of the context of international collaborations and tourings, and I will do this in different ways. I'll start with a bit of a frame also of how we've approached this in the ITER program. I then want to bring in some perspectives and some thoughts that align very well with what the program is trying to do, and what Ajay was sort of making us think about a minute ago. And then I'll talk about three different themes, look into some of the thoughts on what are some of the things that are currently needed in order to continue the important international collaborations that are so essential to how art work and how culture develops. And at the end, look at some of the innovations that the ITER program has brought from my perspective, as a way of opening up some of the practical and more direct ways that we can engage with this. As Takrit also mentioned, justice and climate justice has been central to the way the program has developed, and the focus on justice in terms of environmental degradation and how it affects us differently, not only in different places around the globe, but also depending on our opportunities, our privileges, our racializations, access needs, sexuality, gender, and other marginalizations that might affect the way we are able to participate in this work, has been really important to address. And there are, of course, many different reasons for this. One of them, and the most central one, is that creating a sustainable development on a global scale is very closely connected to justice in different ways. It's closely connected in the sense that injustices are often very closely connected with environmental degradation, as in militarism and war. It's central in that those of us who are more vulnerable will become even more vulnerable when we feel the further effects of climate changes and climate crises, which is already felt in many places in the world. And there are a lot of ways in which the two are connected. So the justice conversation has been important to center in the ITER program as well. It also has come up through some of the collaborations that have been happening already, and focusing on the environment is a way into thinking about differences in a more general sense, and how justice is connected to it. We've talked about how the root causes of injustice and environmental degradations are connected. So we've talked about the colonial aspects of differences, of inequalities, how consumption and global trade affects the way that we are able to move around, and how environmental degradation happens, and how justice appears. And we have looked at it from a systemic view in order to say, how can we in many different ways address this? And one thing is to think about how we lower our own emissions. Another thing is, as Takrit also mentioned, how do we increase the benefits of collaborations in different ways and address justice that way through. The themes that I want to dive into, the first one is this one, because looking at what touring and collaborating across borders looks like in 2026. depends on where you look at it from. So the differences that appear from different regions, different geographies, different places as we experience them, socially, gendered differences, racialization, economic differences. And one of the things that have become increasingly visible, not through collaboration and through the changing political landscape, is that these differences, the differences in how international collaboration looks like and how they are able to develop, looks very different depending on where you are. And this is something that becomes increasingly visible when we look at how people are able to move around or not move around, how the political pressure and resource scarcity affects the different regions and different places differently. And this is something we have to think about when we create collaborations. The second theme here of scarcity and inequality is that we're seeing a shrinking space for arts and cultural exchanges. Resources are increasingly limited, and they tend to hit differently depending on the size of the institution or the size of the organization. The shrinking spaces are not only about economic opportunity, it's also about new conversations about what freedom of speech means, what artistic expression can do and cannot do, and then of course the changes in how resources are distributed to artistic practitioners. Nationalism and branding is another aspect that is affecting the way we're able to do global and international collaborations. We're seeing how national funding in different countries are increasingly politicized in terms of national identity politics, and rerouted into projects that in different ways support or bolster this different understandings of what national identity is. In some cases, we're also seeing that this pushes the initiatives that are trying to create international collaborations into a space of compensating or funding national initiatives because of the way that funding is rerouted into different aspects. And this is something that affects the ability to collaborate internationally and tour in just ways, in a very big way. So some of the things that we've identified with partners, through conversations and research and through projects that look specifically at how collaborations happen and what is needed. These three needs, or these three examples, are aspects that are incredibly important in order to sustain and develop new collaborations internationally. Spaces and opportunities for experimentation is one of them. When we are seeing increased pressure on how collaborations can happen, there can be a tendency to formalize and simplify the opportunities, both in terms of funding and routes and collaborative models. We need opportunities to experiment in order to find new and just ways to collaborate, also looking forward, especially in light of what of the different pressures and the different political climates across regions and countries that we're seeing. The experimentation is key. Long-term and flexible partnerships is another one, in this sense, meaning that there are partnerships that allow for stability, a sense of trust, a sense of continuity when things and opportunities change, and when political climates change rapidly. The flexibility here, of course, being that because of changing political climates, the ability to change how partnerships work and how resources are distributed, for example, are incredibly important. And that leads to the final need here: collaborations that support diverse needs. This means that looking at collaborations from different places and from different positions is important, and understanding that in some places the needs are perhaps practical and have to do with supporting applications for visas in order to travel. In other cases, it has to do with creating a time frame that allows for a more volatile or unstable structure that artists are able to participate in. And the need here is that I think increasingly the awareness of these diverse needs are being seen more and more, but are still not always supported through the structures that help support, especially financially support, international collaborations. And this is incredibly important to keep in mind. So from the ITER program, we've seen a range of incredible innovative approaches, and Tagrid has already mentioned several of the ways, not only new ideas, but how they have been explored in different ways through slow touring, concept touring, and deep touring, for example. And I think from my point of view, some of the innovations that have been really important and that stand out are the questions that we've asked here: who can tour and how? So looking at accessibility into touring structures, and how do we build a just system that not only allows or creates access for people who are often excluded from traveling, from artistic collaborations, but also create spaces where we don't just include, but rethink how touring can happen. And some of the answers we're going to hear today from other speakers are exactly those questions that are being raised. The new dialogues with audiences and partners, I think, is important. I've felt that the idea or the feeling that artistic collaborations are so important in order to shape society also alters the sort of activist or sort of resistance voices within the arts, and having new dialogues, new bold dialogues, both with audiences and with partners. They can be with venues or with funders or with national agencies. Have been really central to the way the conversations has happened in the ITER program as well, which I have found very, very inspiring. Conceptual connections. So thinking about how we can connect with touring in a different way, as Tagrid also mentioned, and which we've addressed in different ways, I think is an important part. And finally, I want to add that one of the innovations perhaps is refusal, and refusal understood in its broadest terms, saying, what if we get rid of existing formats? What if we simply refuse to tour? What happens then? And then exploring what the answers to refusal also are. Often, of course, because of the importance and the value of international collaborations, refusal doesn't mean not doing it, but by allowing ourselves to rethink completely what does it actually mean, and what is it that we want, what is it that it can bring to us, and how do we do it in a way that centers justice and creates new formats is really important. So bold questions like refusal is important. I want to lead us into a short break with a simple question or simple, I'm not sure, but a single question at least, that hopefully allows you to reflect a second And the question is, how might you center climate justice in your touring activities and collaborations? And yes, it sounds, the question is simple enough, but of course the answer is less simple. And we'll be hearing more about ways to do this after the break. But maybe a short reflection saying, what am I doing already? And what are the ways that I think about creating structures that that allow for a rethinking of who has access, who benefits, and how the connection between justice and climate and environment is central to what we do.
So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jonas Kohl, from Foreign Bauhaus. They're an organisation, a Danish association specialising in the production of innovative music formats and events. The events range from local performances through to larger national events and tours and huge international collaborations. All of their projects, whether they're big or small, are focused on music's inherent ability to create community. Jonas himself is a classically trained singer and composer, and he's worked for Foreign Bauhaus since 2024. And he will share some learning from the Green Folkways Exchange, which is a winning project on ITER 4. It focused or connects with concept touring, so exploring ecological wisdom in local traditions across Europe and Ukraine, where materials travel across borders rather than artists. So I'm excited to hear from you, Jonas. Would you like to introduce yourself and your work? Thank you.
Unmute first. Great. Yes, my name is Jonas, and I work for Forening Bauhaus. My pronouns are he, him. I am a 30-something-year-old man with long brown hair and a full beard. Yeah, now I will tell you a bit about the project Green Folkways, which I'm a part of. So Green Folkways is a cultural exchange project. More specifically, it's about it's about exchanging folklore and traditional music. And in a way, it's kind of a pilot project where we aim to both test and develop methods and approaches. So the project is made up of a lot of different field works that the different participants are going to do. This fieldwork will include research, of course, and workshops, and this work will conclude in local performances with local ensembles. And all this fieldwork will take place semi-simultaneously in the different participating countries, so that that one performance will influence the next ones, and we can share our learnings that way. All this work will culminate in a final presentation in Denmark, where all the participants come together and sort of make the final piece that will represent all of our learnings. And that is, of course, our main goal, though our secondary goal is to create a repository of knowledge, both in of course texts and in our methods, workshops, and in recordings of said workshops and performances. And we hope that this repository can be used, for instance, for future research. Though we would really like to see it as also being a platform for other parties to do a project kind of like this, which will further add to the knowledge pool and sort of expand the project a lot further than its current scope. So next slide. So touring with intent. Touring with intent for us in this project meant really thinking about how to move the knowledge and the learnings and the works between each other, because of course to do a cultural exchange project like this requires something to move, but not necessarily people, as it turns out. So You could, of course, do something like this with a smaller team, traveling to the different countries, staying there a bit, and doing that work. But that would probably take longer because you have to be at the different places and do all that work that we can do sort of simultaneously. And it will also have a bigger carbon footprint. As we of course don't really need to travel that much, considering that all the participants are already in the countries that we are studying. And we will also have a deeper connection with the culture that we're studying. I, for instance, have a better starting point in understanding Danish folklore and music, and I imagine that it's the same for the other participants. So I have in this slide included a picture of the model, the leverage points for change, which is a model that we got introduced to in the ITER program. And I'll not go into too much detail about it, but very basically, it's about the different things you can do to change a system. And starting from the lower end of the scale, or perhaps the higher, at least the higher numbers, as you can see in the pictures, but closer to the tipping point is the more concrete, practical things that you can do, like lowering your carbon footprint, and towards the higher end is more about philosophically engaging with the system as a whole and seeing more structural change as such. And I think our project sort of works in both ends of the spectrum. Whereas we do have a lot of focus on how to practically minimize our own carbon footprint and creating models for doing that, which we hope will be useful to future projects. That is of course a leverage points in the lower end, going a little bit up. But at the same time, we have a focus on this. What's it called? This folk wisdom. What's the word? Yes, which I'll get into in just a moment. Which aims to really work with the way that we see the world, how we even conceptualize the problem of climate change. We can go to next slide. So yeah, what is ecological wisdom? What wisdom is there in folklore? And yeah, I don't have nearly as much time to delve into this to explain it comprehensively as I would like, but I'll say that the way I see it, we as a species have had a evolving relationship with nature, where we at some point were very dependent on nature, how the weather was, how good our harvests were, depending on the weather cycles. And at that time, we had a very different relationship with nature. By this dependency, we sort of personified a lot of natural phenomenons with the mythical creatures and spirits and such. And in this relationship, we had a lot more of an even footing. And I think we've sort of lost that a lot today, where we don't really need to pray to the gods to have a good harvest, because we have greenhouses and artificial irrigation. But in the loss of this dependency, I sort of feel like the relationship we have to nature is more lopsided at our end. And so we hope with this project that we can sort of dig into this earlier relationship and see if we can salvage some of it and perhaps use that in motivating change for the future. This is of course something that we all discussed, but this is my perspective of that discussion. And the good thing about being a lot of different peoples in this project is there's a lot of different perspectives. For instance, when my full theater, they came with this point of could this sort of project be used not just to conserve nature, but perhaps also reconstruct nature? Which is, of course, something that is very relevant across the world, obviously, but I think especially in Ukraine at the moment, which is something that I'm really looking forward to work with. And a final point, which is really about this whole state of the world. I think it's really important to have projects like this where we both are a lot of different countries working together, making connections across countries, but also in digging into this folklore, we are trying to find the things where we are kind of the same. For instance, I learned from my poor theater about Ukrainian household spirits, which I think is very similar to a mythical creature in Denmark called a nisse, which I think is commonly translated to leprechaun, but it's a different creature to what I know about Irish leprechauns. But that is sort of a mythical creature that does the same thing. And I think if we can see the similarities between our cultures, I think we will be in a better place to stand up together in this rapidly changing world. So I think that was my time.
Thank you so much, Jonas. Such an interesting thought of how we can collaborate and come together at the end. If anybody has any questions that come up for them during any of these speaker presentations, please do put them in the Q&A. I can see a couple coming in. For now, I would like to move on to introducing our third and final speaker today. Her name is Guli Seksa from Riatica. Guli is the person behind Riatica, working across artistic development, dramaturgy, strategy, and international distribution and mobility. She collaborates closely with artists on how work is shaped, contextualized, and moves across contexts, with a focus on sustainable and regenerative ways of working at all levels. Guli was part of the Changemaker group in ITER 4 and is currently involved in 2 ITER projects, Threshold and Regenerative Business Frameworks in the Arts, which she'll share today as a practical framework built on renewal and reciprocity, empowering artists to break free from extractive production cycles. So Guli, would you like to take it away for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Vicky. Hello, my name is Guli Sekse. My pronouns are she, her. I'm, say it like that, recently no longer in my 30s, and I'm joining from Bergen in Norway. I have short, dark blonde hair, and I'm wearing a dark blue shirt today. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you so much for the invitation. So I have some slides there, and then you can just put the next slides, please. What does it mean to tour with intention and purpose in 2026? Today I'll share a few reflections based on the ITER project Regenerative Business Frameworks in the Arts, which I'm co-leading with Karen Toftegård from Welltopia in Denmark in partnership with Farnham Maltings in the UK. Through the project, we are exploring what a regenerative approach in the arts could look like in practice. And we are in the beginning and still in our research phase. Sustainability has given us many important methods, tools, and ways of reducing harm, and this has been and still is essential work. Regeneration asks a different set of questions. It also asks how our work can give back and strengthen the systems and infrastructure it is part of. In other words, how we create conditions where something can grow. And when we talk about systems and infrastructures here, we mean several interconnected levels. The individual level, artists and people working in the field, the organizational level, like companies, institutions, funding bodies, etc., and the wider social, cultural, and ecological context. So the whole ecosystem, really. And this matters because it changes how we think about touring in practice. Many people are working in the field under constant pressure to apply, produce, premiere, tour, remain visible, etc., etc., and that pressure also shapes how we move. In many cases, our mobility is high, but not always meaningful as it could be. We move quickly between places, often with very little time for exchange, continuity, or meaningful connection to develop. We arrive, we present, and then we leave again. And over time, that affects not only the work, but also the people doing it. At the same time, there are artists and organizations already practicing other ways of touring, like we also have heard today, like creating space for exchange, building long-term relationships and partnerships, and allowing work to evolve over time. But these ways of working are still largely dependent on access to resources, stability, and support. So it's not only about individual intention. It is also about systems surrounding the work, like funding systems, production timelines, expectations around visibility and growth, and what those systems make possible. And that also makes this a question of justice. Who is able to continue working over time? Under what conditions? And how our work relates to the wider systems we are part of, including the planet. From our research, a few things have become clear about touring. First, as we know, much of the value of touring happens beyond the moment of presentation. It sits in what develops in and around it, in relationships, in partnerships, in exchange, and in how a work develops over time. But in many current formats, that value has very little space to develop. Time is short, focus is often on delivery, and continuity is often limited. Second, how we move matters. Touring is not just about where work goes, but how it relates to different contexts as it moves. Whether there is time for exchange, whether something develops, and whether anything continues beyond the visit. And then third, the constraints are structural. This is not mainly about artists making better choices. It is shaped by funding systems, production timelines, and by how value is defined and supported. So even when there is a desire to work differently, the system often pulls in the opposite direction. In our project, we use the term regenerative business frameworks, and we realize that this can sound quite contradictory, especially with the word business and regenerative together. But what we mean by this is simply the structures that shape the work, how it is organized, how it moves, and what is able to continue over time. Because whether we name them or not, these structures shape what becomes possible. Right now, many of them reward speed, measurable outcomes, and continuous output. And that makes it very difficult to build continuity, relationships, and long-term value. So this is why this matters. Not because artists need to be more business-like, but because without engaging with these structures, it is very difficult to work differently. And this is, of course, not something artists can carry alone. The ability to work in more regenerative ways depends on the different levels of the systems around the work are organized, including funding systems, institution, and support structures. So the ability to work in more regenerative ways depends on the whole ecosystem. So what changes? A regenerative perspective doesn't change how we tour. It changes what touring is in service of. From visibility and short-term circulation towards exchange, development, long-term relationships, and contribution to a wider ecosystem. So touring is no longer in service of the project, but of what the project becomes part of. What we are working towards is a framework for working more consciously with the conditions around the work, how it is organized, how it moves, how value is created, seen and understood, and what it builds over time. And it means asking, what is being strengthened? What is at risk of being lost? And what needs to change for something to continue and develop? So, touring with intention and purpose in 2026 may not be about doing more or less, but about being much more precise about what we build through the way we move. Not just how we sustain our work, but what our work sustain. Thank you.
What a wonderful reflection to close on. Thank you so much, Guli. I would like to just take a moment to invite anyone who has any questions following Guli's talk, Jonas's talk, or Ajay's talk to type in the Q&A, and I will hand over to Frederick for this next section.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. Maybe I will just give you all a few seconds to type any questions in. It's easiest to do it in the Q&A function, so we have everything in the same place. So hopefully you can do that, and then in a very short while I will see if I can answer, or we can answer, the questions that have already popped up. All right, I think I'll start, and then we'll see. Please keep adding questions if you like. The first question that has been presented here is actually a twofold questions. How can artists or ensembles negotiate for more sustainable touring practices without risking future bookings or damage to their reputation? And the second part of this, what practical strategies help orchestras balance the higher fixed costs of slow touring with tight budgets, especially around accommodation, per diems, and travel logistics? I think this is an excellent two-part question, and bringing a lot of the conversations that we have raised here as well into a very practical perspective. And it allows me, I think, to answer in different ways, based both on the experiences from ITER participants, from what others have done, and from the work that we are engaged in Infotouring when we advise and help artistic collaborators, funders, venues, theaters, and so on to address some of these issues. The first one, how to negotiate for more sustainable touring practices without risking future bookings or damage to their reputation, is I think a question that is central to a lot of a lot of new steps in different ways. So when we address this, I often think about how to manage the risk that is involved in doing any kind of change, especially within an organization. And this is at the heart of this question, I think, sort of what are the risks of doing new things, and how do we manage that in a way where we feel that we can control it and address it in meaningful ways. And I think that the question here is partly structural. I think what Jonas and Guli as well have been talking about, the sort of the systemic view on how these things come together is important. So what we've seen in the ITER program, for example, is some very exciting collaborations between artistic organizations, so orchestras, for example, and venues, so that the actual collaboration becomes a dialogue between the different partners involved in creating more sustainable touring practices. And of course, this is not necessarily something that is an opportunity for everyone in all instances, but it's a beginning, it's a start of thinking without us having to take on all the risk. How do we distribute this risk, and how do we help each other to create more sustainable structures in a way that doesn't leave it on the shoulders of an orchestra or an artist to carry. So I think this is a very important thing to start thinking about, how those collaborations can happen. However, there are also sort of internal changes that can happen, and I think one of the things that we have worked on with artistic producers in different ways is to figure out how the intention of touring and the intention of what the work and the collaborations that they want to do, how they are very explicit and become part of what the sort of the product or the production carries. So connecting to what Guli was saying, it's not only about what we tour, it's what that touring brings with it. And that often requires being quite specific about how we would like to do things. And we've seen that even though it does come with a higher risk, it also comes with new abilities and new partnerships when, for example, orchestras or theaters dare to be very specific and explicit about how they would like to do touring and productions. So that's another way of turning it around, saying maybe this can actually add to reputation more than take away. The practical strategies, I think, is also important, and this connects to the systemic view very much. In what we're doing in the ITER program, what the winning projects here are trying to do is create new connections, and maybe also looking at what are the different levers of change that we can use. And in terms of higher costs of slow touring, for example, the negotiation or the dialogue with funders is really important. In my own work, we advise and help develop new strategies on many different levels, from the very political to the organizational to the individual level. And in all of this, the ambition is to push justice and sustainable practices into the conversation. So, for example, helping funders see if we need to support this transition, what do we need to do? And one of them is to, for example, create ways for higher cost connected to slow touring to be part of the way funding can happen. And although it's happening slowly and it doesn't happen in the same way across different regions, there are changes that we are seeing where this becomes more possible to actually count into the budgeting that happens. But it is a systemic question because it requires change on different levels at the same time in order for this not to land on the artistic producers in themselves alone. I hope this was a question to those parts.
Frederick, I think Ajay would like to offer some responses.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Frederick. Really insightful. Just wanted to sort of find a way of bringing both Scylla's and Diana's both questions together, because I think there's a kind of synergy between them, between the two. I mean, the first thing I wanted to say is the first thing I said at the beginning of this webinar, and that was the system is broken. Let's fix it. I mean, that's quite controversial, but I think if we first of all recognize that, in order to rebuild, and I say that in the broadest context of rebuilding, we need to recognize, because there are winners and losers in systematic structures, and I think Frederick so clearly positioned some of that earlier. And I've learned so much from this program as a result of that. And I think recognition is really important. So if we recognize that, and this is quite a big, bold statement to make, that the system as we know it, which is, touring which means, taking some form of transportation to another place, staying there, offering your artistic creativity, and then coming back to wherever you need to come back to. If we understand that's what touring, the shape of touring looks like, then in order to rebuild it, we need to understand what monumental changes and challenges we are faced with, as some of our brilliant speakers have spoken about during the course of this webinar. The second thing I wanted to say was just bringing those two questions together is, what risk and what reputation, and these are individual risks and these are individual reputations. But I think what we're trying to, if I've understood this correctly, is change can only happen collectively. And if we're trying to fix a small part of the machine, we have to step back and talk to everyone who's involved in developing the component of the machine, if that makes some sort of sense. And that means stepping right back, stepping right back to, the drawing board almost. I think also the challenges on a practical level of touring, and even now I'm receiving the odd email here and there talking about, and I'm seeing news reports of people saying, don't, particularly airlines saying, please don't cancel your tickets. If you booked tickets over the course of the next 3, 6, 9 months, please don't cancel them, because, the fuel prices are going up. People are, concerned that, travel will cost. And so there are lots of challenges out there that are beyond our control. I think the other elephant in the room that often goes missed, and again, I sort of slightly touched upon this, is we are, particularly in the UK, is we are walking into, our sector is becoming, is attracting more and more. And I see this in academic courses, I see this in consultants, in freelance artists, are coming from places where perhaps they are from wealthier families. And I'm not talking about rich, wealthier families, but there is this kind of imbalance that is happening, that is kind of attracting a smaller group of our population that might not necessarily often have those international diaspora links that I spoke about. And just the final point that I just wanted to make was, there are lots of conversations to be had here, because we're all, I think we're all largely singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, but there are different conversations to be had in different spaces. And I think, Diana, I think your question of the second question, what are the practical strategies? I think it's a great one, but I think in some ways one has to ask the question: who is that for? Who are the audiences? Where is it going? What is the long-term sustainability of that kind of big group of people traveling, to alternative different venues? I mean, both great questions, and I just wanted to sort of recognize that they are important, but I think there's something about recognizing to rebuild. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. I think those insights and connections are incredibly important, and I really think you're addressing some of the changes that are happening and the inequalities or the different perspectives that are happening within the sector itself is also really important to these questions. I will. There are a lot of wonderful questions popping up now, so I will jump quickly onwards, and hopefully we can get around to all of them. Lucas has asked the question: have you considered the impact and extra barriers to disabled people in engaging in sustainable practice? Perhaps you're aware of the No Climate Action Without Us toolkit by Attitude is Everything, which addresses this. The first thing I want to say, if you don't know it, I think this is an excellent opportunity to promote this particular toolkit. So I will encourage everybody to look into it. There are different ones, but this is a great example. And to answer the question, yes, in our work we have considered the impact and extra barriers. At the same time, I think it's important to say that this is a conversation that is still largely overlooked, not only in the climate and sustainability context, but everywhere, unfortunately. And I think it is incredibly important to open it up, because when we attempt new things, there are also always consequences, and if we don't consider the variety of different perspectives and abilities and needs, then we risk creating more barriers to people who are already marginalized or minoritized in any conversation, also in terms of sustainability. I believe, without having any sort of specific question or answer that answers this question in all instances, I feel that the conversations we've had in the ITER program and around new ways, these new questions of who can tour and how, are beginning to create not only practical responses to this, but simply to place these questions at the center of new initiatives. And as with all things, it's never possible to create solutions that fits and works for everybody, but it is certainly possible to create awareness around it. I know, for example, also of many riders. The green riders have been quite in sort of a central part in the conversation around the ITER program and how to address climate and environmentability. Accessibility riders, of course, is also a tool that is beginning to be used, and I think also by institutions who receive them. So that's one practical example, but there's a lot of work to be done in this area, which I think is incredibly important. So the encouragement here for everyone to look at the toolkit is here. I would like to use this opportunity to do that.
Friedrich, if I may just come in briefly,
Yes.
because we worked on this toolkit alongside Attitude is Everything, and just to briefly say that this is at the heart of all of our work, whether it's related to touring only or all aspects of our work across the cultural sector, and it sits at the heart of always working to be equitable and just. And that means that those with disabilities or access needs need to be considered from the very beginning rather than as a footnote, and that we really think about those that are not able to adopt conventional ways of slow or deep touring from the beginning, and not make the onus on them to have to raise their hand and say, that doesn't work for me. Same with those with caring responsibilities. And of course, as you know, we mentioned both of those very briefly. And of course, people from global majority, based in global majority countries, who have no choice but to fly, and otherwise they literally wouldn't work because local infrastructures don't allow them to have funding otherwise, and most of the funding comes externally. And again, you know, there's no infrastructure for slow travel. So it's really important that we look at practical ways and encourage the system to support those practical ways, which some of it means that those who can travel slowly do it, who don't have disabilities or access needs, please do it for those who can't, and that specific funds are dedicated for people who are disabled or neurodivergent, making initiatives for them specifically to make tickets cheaper or free, and also looking at working with suppliers that make accessibility on travel accessibility and venue accessibility possible, you know, and that they are easily available, that there are no higher fees and so on. So it really is about embedding very practical and systemic ways of doing this work from the very beginning.
Thank you, Sigrid. We don't have a lot of time left, but there are a few questions around the regenerative aspect of touring. And Guli, I wonder if you would be willing to offer maybe a short, maybe it's a reflection or an answer to some of these perspectives before we have to end this session.
Absolutely. Maybe more a reflection than a good answer, as we are also early in the process, and maybe hopefully I will have the chance to give a better answer later on. But I saw that there was an example of regenerative touring, concrete example, and this is a very good question and still a bit difficult question. But as I see it now, it's about, for example, long-term partnerships, long-term relationships with venues or festivals, or when you have residencies. These are examples on also regenerative, because then it's like this circulation, and you give and you take with you. And also, for example, work in progress showings with, you know, you have a talk afterwards. That's also give back also to both ways with the work. So then it's also about this leaving behind something. If it's a new collaboration, an exchange, or this is also an example. And it's also a lot with this about funding. This is also why I talked a bit about that, because this is the whole ecosystem. So this is something we will, of course, work further on in our research, and we will have case artists that will be case studies for us. And we are also talking with people outside the performing arts field or arts field to learn more, like in the business world, and then to try to translate it. And then with the funding, I think it's also to see if one can find also funding elsewhere than only the funding bodies, in a way, sort of ways of collaborating, like we already do with co-productions. Of course, this is one example, but these things is still to sort of research and find out. So it's early, but I hope I have some answers to it now.
Thank you, Guli. There were definitely some pathways to explore, also maybe together, maybe individually. So only because of time, I will end the Q&A session here. There are a few more questions in there, but hopefully we managed to get around the variety of different themes that opened up in the talks that we had. So thank you all, and Vicky, I will hand over to you to end our webinar for today.
Thank you so much, Frederick. much more quickly than I intended to try and honour the closing time of this webinar. Just to let you know, informally, partners have shared that they are expecting to publish more information on an upcoming round of ITER in June, with a potential application deadline in September. So it's likely to be similar to ITER 4, the most recent round. So if you are interested in that, please do sign up to Julie's Bicycles newsletter, Infoturum's newsletter, or the funding newsletters, or the newsletters of our funders, Arts Council England, Arts Council Norway, and the Danish Arts Foundation. So do keep your ear to the ground on that. I would love to just share a closing quote with you from one of our participants in ITER 3. We, as cultural operators with a voice and a power, have the potential and perhaps also the responsibility to impact the audience through artistic content. So please take that provocation and thought away with you. What are we responsible for? And how can we do this differently? How can we do more, go further, be better in what we do, and give back to the people that we are touring to and with? And I will leave you with one final closing prompt. What will you take away with you from today to explore in your own work? Please do take that question with you, have a think about it, reflect maybe after this webinar, note something down and set an intention. We would love for you to take something with you from today. Without further ado, I would say an enormous thank you to our wonderful speakers, to Guri, to Ajay, to Jonas, to Frederick, to Tagrid. An enormous thank you to Hannah Graham for putting all of this together for us. And thank you to all of you for attending today.